My name is Lindsay Baciuska, and I did a research project on the comparison of GPA and first-time pass rate for the BOC exam at a small liberal arts college, aka Emory-Henry College. I used the athletic training program as my study group for my data. So I had 3 hypotheses instead of 1. My first hypothesis was that students who passed the BOC on the first attempt would have a significantly higher GPA than those who didn't pass on the first attempt. To follow that, my second hypothesis was that students that were athletes as well versus non-athletes would have a better chance of passing the BOC on the first attempt. And then my third hypothesis was that students that were affiliated with Greek life would have a higher GPA and in turn pass the BOC on the first attempt. The purpose of this study was I decided to look into this partially because we're having a lot of talk in the athletic training program about the BOC with students not doing so well and what we can do to better those numbers. So I decided to kind of assist the Emory-Henry Athletic Training Program in identifying variables that would possibly predict BOC first-time pass rate success. And this could potentially change the way that students are interviewed for acceptance into the program, as well as the way that students are taught the material needed to pass the BOC exam, such as implementing the books that we have currently, the checkoff books, and also doing the sorry, I can't think right now, the exit interviews that we have. My methods section, I started out with 16 subjects, and they were from the years 2011 to 2013. I obtained their GPA, their athletic participation, and their Greek affiliation. I then took that data and put it into SPSS and Minitab, and this is what my data ended up looking like. So in the participants column, you can see all 16, and then in year, the first year, number 1, then number 2, and number 3. Year 1 is 2011, year 2 is 2012, and year 3 is 2013. For the attempts, a number 1 means that they passed on the first attempt for the BOC, and a number 2 means that they did not successfully pass. For athlete, it kind of follows the same idea. If you're a 2, you're a non-athlete. If you're a 1, you're an athlete. Again, with Greek life, 2, you're a non-affiliate, 1, you're an affiliate. Gender, 1, you're a male, and 2, you're a female, and then the GPA column follows with each participant. The instruments that I used for my project was Excel, Minitab, and SPSS. I started out by obtaining all the information from the athletic training program and updating it and putting it into an Excel file, as you saw before. And then from there, I put it into Minitab and SPSS. I ran both, comparisons simply for the fact that I wanted to see if there was a difference between running it in SPSS and running it in Minitab. So if I ran it in one company's program compared to the other, would I have a difference in scores? I ran a comparisons test for all of my data, as well as a Pearson's R, and then independent t-tests for the difference between being a student athlete versus a non-student athlete, and a Greek affiliate versus a non-Greek affiliate. So the Pearson's R was for the GPA versus I'm so nervous. GPA versus the BOC score first time pass. So the results for the first test of the GPA versus first time pass rate of each student came out that it was significant. I ran a independent samples t-test, and when I evaluated this, the hypothesis who passed the students of the first, who passed the BOC on the first time had a significantly higher GPA was supported. The test was significant, and the mean score, or the mean GPA of students who passed the BOC was a 3.5 with a standard deviation of 0.234. For the students who did not pass the BOC on the first attempt, they had a mean GPA of 3.0 and a standard deviation of 0.468. And I just wanted to show in a table, like when it comes out of SPSS, this is the raw data, and then you put it into a table and this is what it's going to look like. So when you're able to read it off, the number of students who passed and then didn't pass, it's an even between the two of 8 and 8, but then your mean is obviously a little higher on the students who passed than didn't pass. As for the second hypothesis that I had, this was, again, the students who were athletes versus non-athletes. There was no significance in this comparison. There was, for GPA of students that were athletes, they had a 3.5 again, and students who did not pass the BOC on the first attempt who were athletes had a 3.47. So they're right at that mark of being very close to one another, and both of their standard deviations are right on top of each other. So with these two being so close, we can't really say that there's a strong difference between one student being an athlete and one student not being an athlete. Lastly, I did the comparison of the students who were Greek affiliates versus non-Greek affiliates, and the GPA of a non-Greek affiliate was a 3.5. Now, the reason I couldn't run a comparison with these was because out of the 3-year time frame that I actually worked with, there were no Greek affiliates that actually passed the BOC on the first attempt. Out of my 16 participants, I had 4 Greek affiliates, and there were no passing scores for them. Which I just stated there. And then the mean GPA for a Greek member was only a 3.1. So if you think about it, that kind of puts them down into that lower scale of being potentially in the non-passing range, and then where our first pass BOC range was at a 3.5. So they're still in that kind of gray area of whether or not, you know, they could be an outlier and pass still, but my data showed that there was no Greek affiliate that actually did pass. So what does this mean for our program in general? With better GPAs for in programs, we would have better pass rates for the BOC. Some ways that I've thought of actually doing this would be talking to other schools that have the same program that we do, maybe even in the same division that we are, or even in, you know, D2 or D1, to see if there's something that they're doing that's helping their students more, or something that we're doing that is helping our students that we can pass on to them. Just to kind of get a comparison of what our program has compared to what their program has. Another thing that I've thought about is that my sample size was extremely small. I looked at a 3-year time period with 16 participants, and there were only 4 Greek affiliates out of 3 years. So that could be an issue of why there were no passing Greek affiliates. It may not necessarily be that they're a part of Greek life, but that we didn't have enough numbers. This is another thing that I've thought about with why our mean scores might be where they are, because my sample size again is so small. So maybe if we are able to look back at a couple years further, then that would help. But at the same time, I ran into the fact that the reason I chose these 3 years was because in 2011, we had 3 people take the BOC with 2 people passing. In 2012, we had 4 people passing, and then in 2013, we had 1 person pass. So it's very small numbers for where people passed and how many people we actually had to take it. Another thing that I've considered is we don't actually receive the actual BOC scores of the students, but they have the opportunity on the test to send the BOC scores to the school for records. Maybe having their actual BOC scores sent to the school as a requirement for our students would be something that we should look into, just so that we can run a more in-depth correlation to what our ranking is compared to like national rankings, other schools in our area, things like that. And that's it. Do you have any questions? Go ahead.
I think I know the answer to the first question, but
Okay.
was your GPA overall GPA or just an in-major GPA?
That was overall GPA.
And my second question is, why did you only choose to go back 3 years for testing?
Because like I was talking about with the fact that so many students only took the BOC, like as we went back further in years, there were less and less numbers, so there was less data for me to work with. So if I chose those 3 years, that was the most data that I could compile. So the more years that I went back, the less that we could find.